The turbulence hadn't even begun when the Judgement did. Passengers shuffled down the narrow aisle of Flight 228, dragging suitcases, adjusting headsets, and searching for their seats with tired eyes. But almost everyone paused, even if just for a moment, when they passed seat 12C. That was where a worn-out single father sat with a tiny backpack at his feet and a little boy curled against his side, clutching a toy jet as if it were the last safe thing left in the world. The father's clothes were clean but old, his jacket frayed at the sleeves, and the way he held himself made it obvious he had grown used to shrinking into space so he wouldn't disturb anyone. Passengers stepped around him, over him, even leaned away from him, as if poverty was contagious. But he kept his eyes down, whispering silent prayers that his son wouldn't cry today. This flight meant everything, and he didn't want more eyes judging them. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that remind us what humanity really looks like, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. It helps the channel grow and spreads positivity. The boy, barely 4 years old, pressed his face to the window and watched clouds drift like soft mountains beneath them as the plane lifted into the sky. The father held his breath. He couldn't afford this trip. He couldn't afford much of anything. But today mattered. This flight was taking them to a military base where something sacred waited, or rather, something painful, something unfinished, something he had tried to hide from his son for too long. As the plane leveled, he tightened his grip on the worn dog tag hanging around his neck. It belonged to the boy's mother. She had died in service 2 years ago, and since then he had done everything in his power to raise their son alone, all while drowning in bills and grief. No one on this flight knew. No one cared. They saw only a tired father who couldn't keep his child quiet, a man with messy hair and a cheap jacket. A man who didn't belong among them. Hours passed with whispers nearby, the kind people pretend not to say out loud. Some passengers sighed when the boy made airplane noises with his toy jet. Others frowned when the father apologized for the third time for taking too long to settle him. But he kept his calm. He had to. His son depended on him being the solid ground in a world that had already taken so much. He looked out the window, noticing faint shapes far in the distance, military aircraft gliding through the sky like silver arrows. The boy gasped, pressing his hands against the glass to watch the F-16 jets cut through the blue horizon. To him, they were marvels. To his father, they were ghosts. Half an hour later, the captain's voice broke through the cabin. His tone had shifted, steadier, more alert. He announced that the plane would soon be escorted by military jets as part of routine airspace coordination. The boy squealed in delight as 3 F-16s flew close enough to cast shadows across the cabin windows. Passengers rushed to capture the moment on their phones, marveling at the incredible scene, while the father stayed still, too still. His heart thudded painfully because this wasn't routine for him. It brought back the day uniformed officers had appeared on his doorstep. The boy's mother had flown missions just like those jets, missions from which she never returned. The weight of that memory pressed against him like a mountain. The lead jet glided stunningly close, its markings and insignia sharp against the sunlight. The boy waved his toy jet excitedly, and for the first time during the entire flight, the father lifted his eyes and allowed himself to truly look. Suddenly, something unusual happened, something no one else seemed to notice. The pilot inside the nearest F-16 had turned his helmet slightly, looking directly into the cabin. Then he raised one gloved hand, and slowed his jet. The father blinked, confused. Why would a pilot slow down like that? Why did he feel like the jet was matching the small boy's movements, almost as if acknowledging him? Moments later, a message came through the cabin intercom. The captain asked everyone to remain seated and quiet. His voice carried an emotional strain that didn't belong in routine announcements. He explained that the Air Force crews flying beside them had requested acknowledgement of a Gold Star family on board, a family who had lost someone in service. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Eyes darted around. Heads turned. And then, slowly, they landed on the single father in seat 12C. The father froze, his throat tightening painfully. He didn't want this attention. He didn't want pity. But when the captain continued, stating that the aircraft escort had been ordered after the base commander learned that the child of a fallen pilot was traveling today, the entire plane went silent. The father's hands trembled around the dog tag. His son looked up at him innocently, not fully understanding but sensing something monumental happening. As the plane descended, the F-16 jet stayed perfectly aligned outside the windows. Passengers watched in awe as the military aircraft guided them all the way to the runway in a display of respect rarely witnessed by civilians. Tears formed in the father's eyes. The escort wasn't for the passengers. It was for them, for his wife, for the sacrifice she made that no one on this plane had known until now. When the wheels touched down, the jets didn't immediately veer away. Instead, they descended slightly, maintaining formation beside the runway as the plane taxied. When the plane finally stopped and the doors opened, something unforgettable happened. As the father stepped into the sunlight holding his son's tiny hand, the F-16 crews, now standing on the tarmac in their flight suits, lined up in formation. One by one, they raised their hands in a formal military salute, directed at the little boy, and at the father carrying the weight of a hero's memory. Passengers inside the plane pressed against the windows, some crying openly, others stunned into silence. The father's knees nearly buckled. He held his son close as he walked past the line of saluting pilots, overwhelmed by an honor he never expected, an honor he felt he didn't deserve. But this moment wasn't for him alone. It was for a woman who once soared through the sky in machines just like those jets, a woman whose bravery lived on in the small child gripping his hand. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Your engagement helps bring more real, emotional stories to the world. Before the ending, please comment below, respect for all single parents. And as father and son crossed the tarmac together, beneath the shadow of the jets that once carried their hero into the clouds, the world finally saw what no one in seat 12C had bothered to notice at first, not poverty, not exhaustion, but love, sacrifice, and a quiet strength that deserved to be saluted.